Are you feeling tired, exhausted, and overwhelmed? If so, in today's podcast, we're going to dive deep into the often neglected issue of burnout, especially among men. Burnout is truly a pervasive challenge that can affect anyone, but regardless of our gender, it can manifest so much differently for us guys. And today, we're joined by a renowned expert who will help us understand the unique factors contributing to burnout in men and explore the effective strategies for prevention and, most importantly, recovery. I want to join us and explore the dynamics of this burnout in a male context and gain valuable insights from our guest speaker on how men can proactively address this issue and achieve a more balanced and fulfilling life. And before we get into all that, we all know that being a man today has never been more challenging. And so the pain that we feel with that is real. It's a pain of loneliness and unworthiness, and it's masked by our anger and our resentment. It's all because we are uncertain and afraid to take that next step. So if you're tired and fed up of where your life is at, then I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest. It's where you're going to become more and accomplish more and live more than you ever have. Just go to members.net, start your quest today. With that, let's get on with today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. Before we get started, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you find yourself feeling with feelings of overwhelm more than normal? And are you ready to throw in the towel? I ask these questions because we may not recognize the effects that stress can have on our lives. And with it too much stress, it can leave us feeling burned out as we fight through whatever life is throwing at us. Well, no more, because today my guest not only shares his journey through burnout, but also provides us a few ideas about what we can do to get back on track. So allow me to introduce my guest. Hailing from Westchester, Pennsylvania, Dr. Richard Mitchell is a father of three and a life coach who helps high-achieving professionals overcome burnout and get fired up about their personal and professional lives. He retired as an educator and became a life coach who is passionate with helping people find joy and fulfillment that they deserve. Through his own story of burnout, Rich helps us to identify the symptoms of burnout in our lives, but also so we don't fall victim to it. Thereby, we steer ourselves towards lives that we want and we truly deserve. Welcome to the show, Rich. How are things, my friend?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate your having me on, and I'm excited to help people through their burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we're gonna for sure spend time on that. We'll probably expand on that topic because I'm sure there's lots of different nuances that we can get to it. But I always ask all my guests, the opening question is to really tell us about, our hero's quest. We're all on a hero's journey in our lives. And so tell us about that time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do about that? And how did that experience shape you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
Sure. So I've had many hero's journeys throughout my life, but I think this latest one was one where it wasn't that I decided to change it. It was that things were changing and I had to follow. I had to keep up. And what that was right at COVID. I ended up getting divorced right at the beginning of COVID. And there were a lot of other things going on in my life. My father had brain cancer. And so it was just like a bunch of different things that were happening that really made everything changed. And that whole first year, I really was just trying to keep up, and I figured out that my kids were keeping on, everything kept moving. And I had to kind of lean back and pick up the pieces and try to catch back up with them. So the biggest thing I learned at that point was that things didn't stop. I had to recover as well as I could to then, catch up with everything that had kept going. And since then, it's just kind of continued a really big roller coaster for me. And each time I pick up and start over and keep on moving. So that's really what led me to the burnout coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are two massive massive things that we deal with in life, right? And we have those challenges where our relationships may not work out to that lifelong thing that we might imagine in our lives. And then when we are faced and confronted with that, it really tests about who we are as identity and how we identify ourselves as men. And so tell me a little bit more about that. How that struggle was for you? Did you find that really shaped you in terms of how you identified, and do you see yourself differently, or how did that whole scenario play out for you?
Well, I mean, it as divorces go, it's been decent. There's I've heard horror stories, and my father was a domestic relations attorney for 50 years, so I could tell from him that things can go pretty haywire. And so I grew through this whole journey. I've grown as a father most. I've grown as a person, but as a father, because suddenly I went from being on a team of two, and I had my roles, and my ex-wife had, their mom had her roles, and we did them, but we just weren't doing them compatibly, right? And so once I left the house, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, now it's all on me when the kids are with me, and it's not on me. It felt like not on me at all when they weren't with me. So it really helped me grow as a dad, because I had to negotiate all the different elements of their lives. And one of the best part about me leaving, and I had a small 2-bedroom apartment. It was really like 1.5-bedroom apartment. And, at that apartment, the kids would get up and, by 6:30, and I had to leave by 8 because someone was going to break an arm. There was just not enough room in the apartment. And so we went, and we went creek stomping, and we went, hiking, and all these different things. And I was very grateful for that small apartment, because it really made me have adventures with the kids. And I wouldn't have necessarily done that had I not, been, almost felt like it was forced to. So that's just one example of how I became a better dad. The flip side of that, though, was that the concentration on my family, which was absolutely what needed to happen, what then became very difficult to be at work. And ultimately, that's why I ended up leaving, because I wasn't any longer interested in the work, because I was concerned about my family.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just listening to you describe your scenario, the place that you're in, and I think back to 27 years ago when my divorce happened. I had married my high school sweetheart at the time, and I really truly felt that this was the one and only. And when that didn't, and the reality was that things needed to change in my life, I totally empathize and can understand what the struggle you were going through, because the work that I was doing back then, while I was excited about it and I was very successful, it just wasn't as fulfilling anymore. Mm-hmm. Needed to find something different and channel that energy. And so let me ask you, what's alive and real for you today now that you've started to go through this piece? What's really alive for you?
So everything about my current career, I've really gelled everything into like exactly what I want it to be. I was sort of invited out of my profession, out of my career. And that was like the best thing that could have happened, because I was no longer interested in it. I was at a point where, it was like, well, I can do this for another 15 years and not see my kids. The conundrum was that through all the divorce process and everything like that, I was not able to see my kids because of the job. And because of the job is why I got divorced. So there was like this whole thing, and I never really resented my job, but ultimately I could certainly see that in myself, that would have been. All that is to say that, having left the profession and moved into coaching full time, that's been exactly what I needed, exactly what I want to do, because I'm able to help people through exactly what I went through, and try to help them so they don't go through what I went through, but at the same time, be the best person I can for my kids. I mean, I just raced home from baseball practice, and I got home and jumped in the shower, and, and I, like an hour ago, I was sweating it out on the field and pitching to 6-year-olds. And now I'm here, and, and that's exactly what I want. I want to be able to do both things. And it's very, very helpful and exciting for me. So at this point in my life, this is exactly what I want to be doing.
Outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. And it's just a shift in perspective, right? Of truly what the important things are. And it happens, and it happens for all of us. And when we get that, that knock on the door that says, hey, we got to change in how we do things and show up. It really can be empowering for us when we think about it in the right way. And you're obviously doing that. Now you talk a lot about you have a program, and we're going to get into that a little bit later about this burnout program. But before we get into that, I really want to talk about, obviously you must have recognized some common signs that we're faced. And I know we focus a lot on men, and it may not just be men specific, but tell us a little bit about your experience of what you're finding is the common signs of burnout and how they can really go unnoticed and maybe even misunderstood by us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the reason I even started this was because upon reflecting, I had no idea that this was what was happening. And, at the end of it, it was kind of like, I was always exhausted. I was always, trying to do too many things at the same time. And I wasn't being recognized, or I didn't feel valuable to my organization anymore, like all those different things. But when I really looked back on it, I became so disengaged. I was uninterested in continuing. And one of the big milestones or the big moments in my career, or that, toward the end, was that my supervisor said, you have a goals worksheet, you have goals that you have to write, and we need you to put something about getting a promotion. And I said, well, I'm not interested in a promotion. I don't want a promotion. And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, man, I can't believe I just said that.
That's
not
career
only,
limiting, right?
to my supervisor, right? But it was also like I really didn't, like I wasn't interested in it. And I remember I was on a mediation hearing with my my kid's mom, and we were talking, and the lady was like, you guys are like the best couple. I haven't ever mediated any between couples. And but one of the things my ex said, she was like, so you don't want to be you don't want a promotion. And I was like, no, I don't care anymore. Like I'm worried about the kids. I want to have the kids. And because I had to be at work so long, I couldn't have the kids during the week. So all that is to say that I wasn't able to, it wasn't like I only recognize this stuff now as a point of reflection. I was distracted. I would waste, I feel like looking back on it, I wasted so much time. I was texting friends. I was calling people. I was getting coached during school, during my work hours. I was doing, I was not therapy, but coaching, and all those different things. Really, like when I look back on it, it's like, man, I was doing the job. Like I wasn't not doing the job. I just wasn't doing it with the heart and the presence that I had done almost my whole career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you had some key pieces there, that disengaged and then distracted. And I think back of how that can happen for us, and how we could not, and that's that piece about being really maybe misunderstanding what's going on in our lives. And it can link back to being burned out and the things that are happening in our lives. And especially when you have family traumas, family challenges that are happening, the stresses from work as well built into that. And you name it, add to it, and how we can allow ourselves to just take up these devices, our phones with the great little apps to keep us distracted and scroll, death scrolling through Facebook and whatever your favorite app is, and really not recognizing that potentially we could be getting burned out from what's happening in our lives. So thank you very much for sharing those things for us. Sure. And so what about then? Are there something different going on then with burnout for men then, both in the workplace and in their personal lives? Like, is there something that's more common than what you've mentioned today? Or would you say those are the big ones?
I mean, there's a million different ways to describe it. I think that's part of the difficulty of it, because on the surface, it all sounds like, well, you're just tired, take a couple days off. The idea of a mental health day, and mental health days are days that people sort of sarcastically say, I'm taking a mental health day because they just need to like clear their head, but really they just want to go and like veg on the couch, which is great. But we're not actually looking at what that actually means. Mm-hmm. So if people are saying a mental health day, like we need to look at that. We shouldn't be using that as a sarcastic, joking in a joking sense. And so yeah, I get what I'm trying to say is that it manifests itself in so many people. I don't have a health scare. I know people that have had heart attacks or they nearly had a heart attack. But then looking back, I ended up in the hospital in like last July, or I think last July, I ended up going to the emergency room because I was like, something's off, and I'm not going to be the guy that, didn't go and, and then suddenly it did have a heart attack. So there's a lot of different things. People have stress allergies to stress, and they can't breathe, and there's so many different ways that it manifests itself. But I think that's where we have to help people listen to what's happening in their own lives, and help. And the more I can help people see, okay, this is not just exhaustion. This is not just like disengagement. It might be resentment. It might be, disinterest. It might be like, you're already moved on. You're quiet quitting is a term that we hear a lot now, where people are just kind of checking out and still taking a paycheck. And that's kind of where I was. I hate to say it, but if I'm being honest, like, if I'm going to help people, I have to be completely honest. And that's what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for being raw there and sharing that, because I think that truly is one of those other ways that it shows up, right? We quietly quit, or we work to the profile or the job description, and not an inch past that. And I think when those types of behaviors start to show up, we have to ask ourselves, what's going on? And I really like what you talked about, is being able to listen to what people are saying and what's happening. And so that really requires us to change how we're actually listening. And so talk a little bit more about that and expand how you came across that as a scenario. Was that something for yourself, like listening to your inner dialogue, or was it now also through the work that you're doing with people?
No, it was certainly, for me, it was certainly listening to if I had had the vocabulary and the terminology, I might have understood that this was larger than just being tired, or just being like, there is when I look back on it, it's completely justified for me to be like completely distracted because of everything that was going on with my divorce and, my dad. And then there was a flood that happened, and that was a whole situation. So there's plenty of things that would tell you that, like, well, yeah, how could he not be distracted? But when it comes back to it, in order to listen to yourself, you have to know what the things are, because I think people would have said, like, just take some time off. And in any profession, I don't think just in education, but in any profession, if all of a sudden you're like, I need to take 5 days off because I need to get my head together, like, that's not going to go over well. It's just simply not. That's not the culture that we live in. As much as we're trying to get to that, it's just not. But I will, my argument, what I encourage people to really think about is, if you're not able to take 5 days off for yourself because you're concerned about your family or whatever, then you might have to pivot. That there's ways of pivoting. And that's, there's a couple of questions that people ask me that really changed my life and helped me understand that I could move into something different, and it was okay to do that.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. You're really diving into that next piece. And I wanted to, to probe as well, as we do the work here we do with the Awakened Man, and this podcast is really just looking at different angles of how we show up as men. And really what you're describing are these societal expectations, right? And stereotypes about how we need to be and how we need to show up. And asking for 5 days off, or taking 5 days off, that's not a vacation, but to really, for you to get centered and really get yourself grounded so you can move forward, really can be frowned upon, especially in different kinds of industries. And so, are you finding that is still true today with the work that you're doing, or is it starting to shift for guys, and that's not as much the case?
No, I don't think it's starting to shift at all. I think that it's still it would take a lot of convincing for me to say that to someone. Someone's like, it's on the other side. Like, it makes perfect sense. It's like a parent saying, like, well, in 20 years, you're going to thank me. It doesn't, people hear it, but they're not going to take it. It's only when, and this is, again, it's unfortunate, but it's only when something drastic happens. It's only when you lose your job unwillingly, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like, these are the things that I could have done to prevent it. The overwork and the focus on earning, and the focus on having to earn. I think one of the things that I fell into with my ex-wife is that you can either work 2 jobs and have a home, or you can and be okay and not struggle financially, or you can work, between the two of you can work 1 job that pays, we decided that she was going to stay home with the kids, and that was the decision. She was going to work as a mother, and I was going to work outside the house. And we just couldn't. It felt like we couldn't survive, and have a house and feed the kids and that sort of thing. So it's really difficult to help people understand that there are other ways. It's so uncomfortable to move into any other direction. Because when you get, I'm 50 years old, when you get to be 50 years old and you have all these responsibilities, you can't just like drop everything and move or go, but there are ways to create exit plans and strategies to figure out, okay, well, what is it that I can do? Like, I can't live like this anymore. This is driving me crazy. So what can we do to alleviate that problem and make you excited to be a person again?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I'm sure there may be a listener or two of the say that may be thinking, well, no, it's okay. You can just drop everything and make the change. And while you can do that, it might not be the best decision to make, and it's interesting. You're talking about speaking with your wife and just making the decision about having somebody stay at home with the kids and the other one out in the workforce. My wife and I, just before this, we're 57, she's 58. And we were just talking about, how much have we really done enough planning about what retirement's going to look like? What is that going to look like? What do we truly need? And I was listening to Trip Lanier's podcast, today as I was out driving around, and it was just interesting as he was asking that question of a client that he was speaking with. And I think it's important that we do have that figured out. We do have some of these things figured out, because I suspect that the more ambiguity we have in our relationships, in our personal life, our goals and dreams and aspirations, that can be pretty stressful too, wouldn't it? Like, wouldn't that also drive some of that ultimately to burnout, because we're always on. We never really figured out how to be off. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I work with my clients is that if they're thinking that it's the job that they're burnout from, my first goal is to help them fall in love with their job again, or at least try to. Because what I don't want to have happen is that they hate their job, so they quit, and then they get out and they're like, well, wait a minute, that wasn't the problem. It was everything else, and now I don't have a job and I don't like things. So that's one of the things that I really work with. But it's really important to create an exit plan. So while I'm helping them fall in love with a job, I also am helping them create an exit plan and just seeing, like, what are the possibilities. You might not, you might not change careers and go from one completely different industry to another, but you can pivot within the career. You can pivot and find something new that you can kind of sink your teeth into and be like, oh, this is what excites me. I get, this is where I came from. This is why I started doing this work in the first place. I completely lost that. And, again, it like, from right now, I can't, when I look back at the start of my career until, 2 years ago, the fact that I'm even saying that is absurd to me. But that's, that's what happened. So what I want to do is make sure people, the best way I can put it is, I don't want people to have a burnout story. Yeah. Like, if I can prevent you from having a burnout story, then that's what I've done my job. You get to it and you're like, wait a minute, I think I might be burned out, or I am burned out, but like, this is how I remedy that. And this is how I recover from that, so that it's not disastrous. Because once you lose a job, then it's a whole other possibility of burnout, because now you're scrambling to just make ends meet again. And it might be something that you love to do, but it's still a scramble, and you still have that pressure on you. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, I think in the men's work that I'm doing, and especially in my own life, I'm never baffled, but I'm always amazed at just how little time we spend thinking about these things, like an exit strategy, a future plan. We may daydream about it, and that's really what it is, until we put some parameters around that and have some sort of a plan. But it's never surprising to me to see just how that happens for so many of us. And so it's good that you're doing this, because it's a different way for us to approach men's work and this dealing with burnout for guys, especially in a society where we're driven by, bringing, making the money, bringing it home.
Right.
And we can tend to forget about the other things that are so important that our families need, that we need for ourselves. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about your program now, Burnout to Fulfillment. And in it, you talk about 5 strategies that we can use to get fired up about life again. And I really like the strategy about not having enough time. So can you expand on that and tell a little bit more about that particular strategy?
Sure. So the strategies that I go through are, I went back and forth on this because I was putting them together. And as I was writing them, I have a tendency to write things out of I write until they're no longer valid. It's like, this sounds great. And then I wrote about it and it was like, well, this sounds ridiculous. Like, who wouldn't do that? But then I reached back out and it was like, wait a minute, part of being a burnout person is that you don't think you can take back time. So in the document, in the guide you're talking about, it's really simple. It's taking back 3% of your day. A 10-hour workday, you take back 3%, which is 18 minutes. And it sounds ridiculously simple, but to look at someone and say, I need you to try to find 18 minutes so you can be on your own. You can sit and meditate in your office, close the door and meditate, whatever it is. But like 18 minutes sounds like it might as well be 24 hours in the mind of a high achieving professional that's just rocking. And so that's where that simplicity, it's got to be simple and it's got to be doable. And 18 minutes doesn't, to most people, doesn't sound doable. Where am I getting that 18 minutes? And so I try to put it into percentages because people can see that of a 10-hour day, 18 minutes shouldn't be something that you can't do, and it doesn't have to be a deletion. Like, don't not stop at don't not talk to a friend because you have to save your 18 minutes. Like, maybe it's just being more efficient. Maybe it's getting someone off the phone, like instead of doing the small talk or trying to like let them talk and not hurt their feelings, just be like, listen, man, I got another meeting. Thanks so much. It was great to talk to you. We'll catch up again. I'll catch up with you in a week. And there you go. There's 15 minutes that you have that you didn't have because you stopped the conversation, not polite or not impolitely, but just, as a way to protect your time and that other person's time.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that strategy, and thank you for expanding on it, because I think, and you said a key word there, the simplicity of it. Because when you think about that, when I first looking at your program, and 3% of my time, and at a 10-hour day, 18 minutes, I was already finding myself being challenged. Where am I going to find 18 minutes? And then I'm going, well, I can set my alarm clock a half an hour early. Give me a 10-minute snooze to get up, to find that extra time. I could do that at the end of the day. There's lots of different ways that we can find it. And I think that type of strategy, and really what you're talking about is finding that personal time, that me time, that get recentered and refocused on the things that are important to us. And I really commend you on that, building that program, because I think it's important for us to really learn these strategies. It doesn't have to be too complicated.
Right.
And the simpler it is, the easier it is that we're going to actually adopt it and really embody the practice.
Right. And making it fun. That part of being a teacher is like, you got to sell to the kids that they want to, they want to read this book that you don't even want to read, and trying to help them. So you're a salesman. And, that was not like one of the other pillars is to spend money, like you make over $100,000 a year, spend 2% of it a month, which is like it's $118, $121. I don't know what it was, but it was a very nominal amount. But like, just spend it in a month. Like, do it in a chunk. Say, I'm gonna buy a leather jacket, or I'm gonna buy myself a backpack or whatever. Don't save it. Just like blow $120, and have fun with it, because we have this money and we do all this work to earn all this money for everything, and then we don't actually, we don't enjoy it. And that's a big one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I'm just thinking back, I know a few people that are like that, and they're fantastic, great money managers. But when I look at their lives and the challenge that face them, they're really boring lives, and the relationship isn't that great either.
Right.
Because there isn't any time for fun. There isn't any time for a little frivolous. Like, what's $120 going to really do into your overall big picture? If you're really taking care of yourself. Let me ask you, what's the most powerful question you've ever been asked?
So the most powerful question was, I mean, I always try to make sure I word it correctly. What is the best case scenario? That was the key. That was what alerted me. Okay, what's the best? No one's ever asked me best case scenario. What's the best case scenario if you continue to do what you are doing in 3 years? Versus what's the best case scenario if you leave and do something and follow the passion and the dream that you have? And when I got that question and I took some time, and it was like jarring because of that best case scenario. And it was like, okay, good question, because it's a 3% raise every year for the next 15 years. And I'm plugging along and trying to get through, or I do what I know I can do, and I know how to help people. And that was it. Like that question is really what changed the direction of my life and allowed me to look in different directions. Because if you ask that question in a worst case scenario, it's like, you lose your job and you lose your job on one side, and then the business fails on the other one. Like your effort fails on one side and you lose your job on the other. So they're both worst case scenarios. And so that was that best case scenario question was, because in 3 years I would ultimately be in the same position I am now, except for 3 years more miserable. So
Yeah.
it's not good for anybody.
Yeah, no. And then what a great way to frame that question, because you're absolutely right. Normally that question would come out with the worst case, and that's not really a motivating answer, no matter how you frame that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the best case scenario really brings possibility into our lives, right? It gives an opportunity to think about the things that could be, as opposed to all the things that could not happen. And boy, I just love that. I just love that
what's
answer.
Possible.
That's outstanding. Absolutely.
What's possible.
So obviously, you've written a couple of books, I believe, and you're big in helping people. Tell me, what current book is on your nightstand?
So I haven't written a book. I wrote my dissertation, so that's what I count as my book.
Fair enough.
But right now I'm working. I'm reading a book about burnout called The Epidemic of Burnout. But I also just received a friend of mine who I met through Facebook. He's a motivational speaker. He was in prison for almost 20 years. And he wrote this book called Hey White Boy. And like what happened was, he was in solitary confinement, and a Muslim inmate heard him being angry and said, "Hey, white boy, like, what's the problem?" And so this person changed his life and helped him, overcome the anger. And so I'm reading that now, and I'm so excited. I won his author copy, so I just got it in the mail on Sunday. What's today? Monday. I got it yesterday, and I'm excited to start reading. His name is Sonny Von Cleveland, so I'm excited to read his book as well.
Outstanding book. That sounds like a phenomenal read. I'm going to make sure I pick that one up as well. What's been the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and how has that advice served you?
Geez. I think it goes back to those questions. One of the things that I guess I've kind of synthesized it into my own advice, which is, a career is not a life sentence. And that came from me talking, in education, we have special education. And when someone has a special education program, the idea is not to keep them in special education. We have special education so that they eventually aren't in special education anymore. And so that advice and that constant thinking about that helped me understand that, neither is a career. A career is not a life sentence. We don't have to do that for the rest of our lives. And that goes for, a person that's 25 and got into their career and is like, well, this is not at all what I thought it was. And I know I have so much more in me, but they're concerned about leaving because they went to college and they're paying loans, and people are like, well, what are you doing? Why would you get out of this job? You're making all this money. And, and they're like, no, I get that, but I have to do the thing that I want to do. I'm only, I have my whole life ahead of me. And so that, plus like being a middle-aged guy and trying to handle everything I have to handle, and other guys like us that, have to handle all these things. And it doesn't have to be like, we don't have to like improve things on the margins. We can improve things from within, but it takes understanding you can do that, and the knowledge and awareness that you can do that, and then someone to help you in that direction, because it's scary. It's
Yeah.
extremely scary and difficult, but it's possible, and it's possible because it's hard, it's possible, and because it's possible, it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything worth in life fighting for is going to have some challenges, and it's going to force us to really rise to the occasion. And you're doing that right now, Rich, with that transition, thinking about it, a doctorate, and that could have been the life path, and you're able to take that experience of having your life experience, and now doing this work with folks and helping them move from burnout to fulfillment, I think is phenomenal. And so as we get ready to close out today, if there's one thing that maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about today, or you'd really like our listeners to take away from us, our conversation, what would that be?
Well, so I think the main point is being able to pivot and teaching. One of the things that I talk a lot about, or I try to remember, is that I'm part of why I did this, part of why I'm it's not a 180, but it feels like a 180 in terms of like my profession, is that I want to show my kids it's possible. I don't ever want them to feel trapped or beholden, or golden handcuffs, that whole phenomenon of golden handcuffs. And so I want them to see me do this for them, but also teach them through the pivot and teach them that like it is possible. One of the powerful things about my doctorate has been, because it's like, well, I spent 6 years earning this doctorate, and it really didn't, it's a great experience, and I wouldn't necessarily change it, but like what it's going to do for me is prove to me that I can just do whatever the hell I want. Like if I set my mind to something and it's within reason, like I'm not going to, win the NBA dunk contest, but like if it's something that I really want and it's what I'm going to do, it's what I'm going to do. And so I have that document, I have that, degree in my back pocket and I know that because I did that, and because I've done a lot of other hard things in my life, I know I can do the next thing. And so that, it's not that the doctorate wasn't a waste. The doctorate was like a launch pad to things that might not have been what you would think, but it's, that's what's allowed me. So all that is to say that idea of pivoting, if you feel that that's what you want to do, and you have a feeling that like, this is not what I want to be doing, no matter what age you are, you gotta at least talk about it. You got to figure out and like talk to someone, talk to me, and just figure out, okay, well, this is what I'm thinking. Why am I having these thoughts? And what can I do about them?
Yeah, absolutely, man. What I really like about what you said there was really about that whole idea about pivoting, and it's really about taking that first step, because had you not taken the step to go after your doctorate, the learning wouldn't have been, the amount of learning wouldn't have occurred. And then in the end, it really taught you so much more than just what the doctorate was about. And so I think that's such a key piece. I just love that, how you summed all that up. Just want to say thanks a lot, Rich, for spending time with us today. I think you did provide some ideas and some ways for us to help overcome burnout and really thrive in our lives today. But man, we're interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your work. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure. So they can go to burnout-to-fulfillment.com or richardmitchellcoaching.com. That's my website, richardmitchellcoaching.com. You go there, there's that 5-step guide that I have. And what that allow me to do is communicate with you through email, make sure that you know what's going on in the world of burnout, and how, what the things are that you're seeing and hearing. They kind of normalize it for you, and they say, okay, well, yeah, okay, that is me. Like that's something I need to pay attention to. So it all comes down to richardmitchellcoaching.com. That's where everything you need is right there.
Right on. Perfect. I'll make sure that's in the show notes for today's episode, as well as a few other social links, just to make sure people, wherever they like to hang out, they can get a hold of you, Rich. Just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. I loved our conversation today, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all